beginning, to a time before time had meaning, before the sun rose or set, before anything you could touch or see or name existed at all. We're diving into the Greek creation myth, one of humanity's oldest attempts to answer that fundamental question that's haunted us since we first looked up at the stars and wondered, where did all this come from? This isn't a simple story with a neat beginning, middle, and end. It's a sprawling narrative of violence and beauty, of children overthrowing parents, of love and betrayal, of beings so ancient and powerful they were less like gods and more like the universe itself, becoming aware of its own existence. It's a story that begins in emptiness and ends with a cosmos full of gods, monsters, heroes, and ultimately us, humanity, fragile, mortal, but somehow significant enough that the gods themselves couldn't leave us alone. So settle in. Let the day's worries fade away. Tonight we're not just telling a story, we're witnessing the birth of everything. The primordial void. In the beginning was chaos. The ancient Greeks had a word for the beginning, and that word was chaos. But we need to be careful here, because when we hear the word chaos today, we think of disorder, of mess, of things spinning out of control. That's not quite what the Greeks meant. The word chaos comes from a Greek verb meaning to gape, to yawn, to open wide. It meant a gap, a chasm, an opening in something, and in the very beginning, chaos was the opening between everything and nothing, the space that existed before space existed, the void that somehow contained the potential for all creation. Try to picture it, though the human mind wasn't really built for this kind of thinking. There was no darkness because darkness requires the absence of light, and light didn't exist yet. There was no silence because silence requires the absence of sound, and sound hadn't been invented. There was no up or down, no here or there, no then or now, just chaos. The primordial void, the great emptiness, the cosmic yawn at the edge of being and non-being. The poet Hesiod, who lived around 700 years before the Common Era in the Greek region of Boeotia, wrote the most complete account we have of this beginning. His poem, The Theogony, which means the birth or origin of the gods, starts with these simple words. Verily, at the first chaos came to be. Not that chaos was created by something else, not that some divine craftsman shaped it or spoke it into existence, just that chaos came to be. It appeared. It emerged from wherever things come from before there's anywhere for them to come from. Some ancient thinkers saw chaos as the air, the space between heaven and earth. Others saw it as the murky fog or mist that filled the void, neither quite matter nor quite emptiness. Later philosophers would argue about whether chaos was a deity with consciousness or just a state, a condition, the blank canvas on which existence would be painted. The truth is, the Greeks themselves weren't entirely sure. Chaos was too primal, too ancient, too alien for even them to fully grasp. It was the mystery at the heart of everything, the unanswerable answer to the question of why there's something rather than nothing. But chaos, whatever it was, did not remain alone. From it, or perhaps simply after it, came the first actual beings, the first entities that had form and presence and could be thought of as individuals rather than abstract states. Hesiod tells us that next came Gaia, the wide-bosomed earth, the ever-sure foundation of all, and immediately we can start to understand something Gaia wasn't created in the sense of being crafted or assembled. She emerged. She differentiated herself from chaos. Where there had been undifferentiated void, now there was earth, solid and real, a foundation on which other things could rest. Think of it like this. Chaos was infinite possibility. Gaia was the first actualization of that possibility, the first limitation, the first definition. By becoming earth, by becoming something specific, she created the concept of place, of here as opposed to there. She was vast, immense, the entire planet before the planet even had that name, but she was no longer infinite. She had boundaries, even if those boundaries were almost unimaginably large. And with boundaries came the possibility of relationship, of other things existing in relation to her. With Gaia came Tartarus, the deep abyss, the darkness beneath the earth, as far below Gaia as the sky would be above her. If Gaia was foundation, Tartarus was depth, the bottomless pit, the prison waiting for prisoners not yet born, the shadowy inverse of existence. Tartarus was both a deity and a place, conscious yet also simply being itself, alive in a way that mortal minds struggle to comprehend. He represented the downward pull, the weight, the darkness that balances the light. And third came Eros, not the mischievous baby with a bow and arrow, not Aphrodite's son that later myth would make him, but primordial Eros. The fundamental force of attraction and joining Eros was the principle that would allow things to come together, to unite, to create more complexity. Without Eros, Gaia and Tartarus and whatever else emerged might have simply existed in isolation, eternal and unchanging. But Eros was the force that said no. Things will connect, things will combine, things will generate more things. Creation would continue. Hesiod calls Eros fairest among the deathless gods, who unnerves the limbs and overcomes the mind and wise counsels of all gods and all men within them. Even at the very beginning, even as a primordial force, Eros was irresistible, the compulsion that could not be denied, the drive toward union that would populate the cosmos. So now we have the basic structure emerging from chaos. Gaia, the solid foundation, Tartarus, the depths below, and Eros, the force of attraction that would allow them to do something other than simply exist. The stage was being set, you might say, though there was no audience yet, no play to perform, no actors ready to walk on, but chaos was still birthing. From that primordial void came two more children, two siblings who embodied two aspects of the emptiness. First was Erebus, the deep darkness, the permanent gloom that fills the spaces between earth and underworld, the obscurity that never sees light. Erebus was masculine in Greek grammar, though calling these ancient beings male or female feels almost meaningless. They were forces that happened to take grammatical genders as the language evolved to speak about them. With Erebus came Nyx, his sister, night. Where Erebus was the permanent darkness of the depths, Nyx was the cycling darkness that would sweep across the sky, the shadow that would give rest and mystery and dreams. Nyx was powerful, immensely so, perhaps the most powerful of all the primordial beings aside from chaos itself. Later Greeks would tell stories of how even Zeus, king of the gods, feared to anger Nyx, respected her in a way he respected almost no other deity. She was ancient power, primal force, the darkness that even light must defer to. And here's where Eros begins his work. Nyx and Erebus came together, drawn by that fundamental force of attraction. From union in love, Hesiod says, they produced two children who were the opposites of their parents. First came Ether, the bright upper air, the pure, shining sky that would arch above the earth, the clear, brilliant atmosphere where eventually the gods would dwell. And with Ether came Hemera, day, who would scatter her mother's darkness each morning, bringing light back to the world. Do you see what's happening? From undifferentiated chaos comes differentiation, earth and abyss, darkness and light, night and day. The cosmos is organizing itself, defining itself, creating categories and cycles and rhythms. Where there was only void, now there are relationships. Night gives birth to day. They become locked in an eternal cycle, one always arriving as the other departs, neither able to overcome the other, balanced in perpetual motion. Some ancient texts say that Nyx and Hemera shared a house at the edge of the world in the far west where the sun goes when it sets, but they were never home at the same time. As Hemera departed in the evening, Nyx would return, passing her daughter at the threshold. They would greet each other briefly, one kiss in the doorway, and then Nyx would go out to spread her darkness while Hemera rested until dawn. It's a beautiful image, domestic and cosmic at once, the cycle of day and night imagined as two goddesses taking turns at a nightly task. Meanwhile, Gaia was not idle. She had emerged from chaos as the foundation, but she needed more than just empty solidity. She needed structure, needed form, needed other beings to give shape to existence. And so, without any partner, through her own power alone, she gave birth. This is called parthenogenesis, virgin birth, self-creation. Gaia needed no male principle because she was the foundation itself. She could generate from her own substance. First she brought forth Uranus, the sky, the starry heavens that would cover her completely, equal to herself in extent, able to provide a home for the gods who would one day exist. Uranus was not the air or the weather, but the solid dome of heaven itself, the ceiling of the cosmos, the vault that held the stars in their fixed paths. He was vast and eternal, and from the moment of his birth he looked down upon Gaia with desire. Next came the Urea, the mountains. These weren't just geographical features, but divine beings, each peak a god in its own right, alive and aware though mostly silent, watching the ages pass with the patience of stone. They reached up from Gaia's surface toward Uranus's dome, connecting earth and sky, creating the vertical dimension of the cosmos. They would become homes for nymphs and minor deities, sacred places where mortals could climb to get closer to heaven. And finally, Gaia birthed Pontus, the sea, masculine, primordial, untamed. Pontus embodied all the world's waters before they were divided into specific oceans and seas and rivers. He spread across Gaia's surface, restless and ever-moving, the liquid complement to her solidity. Now the basic cosmos was complete. Chaos the void, from which came Gaia the earth, Tartarus the abyss, and Eros the attraction. From chaos also came Erebus and Nyx, darkness and night, who birthed ether and Hemera, the bright air and day. And from Gaia herself came Uranus the sky, the Aurea the mountains, and Pontus the sea. The universe had structure. It had dimensions. It had the fundamental elements. It was ready for what would come next. And what came next would be the first gods that resembled what we think of when we hear that word. Gods with personalities and desires and plans. Gods who would love and hate and scheme. Gods who would populate the cosmos with an entire generation of divine beings before. Inevitably, catastrophically, children would rise against parents, and the pattern of succession would begin. The age of the Titans was about to dawn, but it would dawn in violence. The first divine generation, the birth of the Titans. Gaia looked upon Uranus, the starry sky she had brought forth from her own substance, and something stirred in her. Call it attraction, call it the inexorable pull of Eros working its magic, call it simply what comes next in the logic of creation. However you name it, Gaia and Uranus came together. The earth and the sky joined in union, and from that cosmic marriage would spring the first generation of beings who were truly what we would call gods. They were no longer abstract principles or elemental forces. They were individuals, powerful beyond measure, each embodying some aspect of the cosmos, each destined to play a role in the drama that would unfold. Gaia gave birth to 12 children from her union with Uranus. These were the Titans, 6 males and 6 females, and they would rule the world through what later Greeks would call the Golden Age. Let me name them for you, because each name carries weight. Each one represents something fundamental, about the way the Greeks understood their world. First came Oceanus, the eldest son. He was the great river that encircled the entire world, flowing in an endless loop around the edges of existence. To the Greeks, the world was a flat disk, and Oceanus was the boundary, the limit beyond which lay only mystery. He was fresh water, the source from which all rivers ultimately flowed, and he married his sister Tethys, who embodied the springs and streams that nourished life. Together, they would become the parents of 3,000 sons, the river gods, and 3,000 daughters, the Oceanids, nymphs who inhabited every body of water in existence. Next was Cronus, whose name possibly meant query or questioning. He represented the intellectual curiosity that drives inquiry, the axis of the heavens around which the stars seemed to rotate with his sister Phoebe, whose name meant bright or radiant. He would father Leto, who would one day bear the twin gods Apollo and Artemis to Zeus, making Cronus and Phoebe grandparents to two of the most important Olympians. Creus came next, a more obscure titan whose name might have meant ram. He was associated with the constellations, with the divisions of the year, with the celestial measurements that would allow later peoples to track time and seasons. He fathered Astraeus, god of the stars, and Pallas, god of warcraft, and Perses, god of destruction, each representing a different aspect of cosmic power. Then Hyperion, the High One, titan of light and of the cycles measured by heavenly bodies. He married Theia, goddess of sight and the shimmering light that makes things visible, and together they produced Helios the sun, Selene the moon, and Eos the dawn. Every day, for all eternity, their children would light the sky, providing the rhythm by which all mortal life would structure itself. Iapetus was the fifth son, and his name may have come from an ancient word meaning to pierce or wound. He would father Atlas, who would hold up the sky, and Prometheus, who would create humanity and steal fire from the gods. Through Iapetus's line would come both humanity's greatest benefactor and greatest punishments. He stood apart from his brothers in subtle ways, less involved in the pure operation of the cosmos, more connected to the suffering and mortality that would define the world to come. And finally, youngest of the 6 brothers, came Cronus. His name might mean crow, or it might connect to Chronos, time, or corone, something curved like a sickle. He was the most cunning, the most ambitious, the most willing to do what others would not. If this were a tragic play, and in many ways it was, Cronus would be the character you watch with suspicion from his first appearance, knowing he's the one who will bring everything crashing down. The 6 sisters were equally significant. Theia, as we mentioned, married Hyperion and birthed the lights of heaven. Rhea, whose name might mean flow or ease, represented the natural rhythms of fertility, the mountains and their wild places. She would become the most important of all the Titanesses because she would be chosen as Cronus's wife, and she would be the mother of the Olympian Gods, though that story lay far in the future. Themis embodied divine law and order, the proper way of things, the rules even gods must follow. Later Greeks would worship her as the goddess of justice, the one who established the natural order of the cosmos. Her sister Mnemosyne was memory itself, the preservation of the past, the thread connecting one moment to the next. She would one day lie with Zeus and give birth to the 9 muses, the inspirations for all art and learning. Phoebe, as we said, married Cronus and became grandmother to Apollo and Artemis. And finally Tethys, wife to Oceanus, mother of the world's waters, nurse and nourisher of all life. These 6 sisters were less often portrayed as individuals in later myth, but they represented the feminine principles of cosmic order, the generative and sustaining forces that balanced their brothers' more active roles. The 12 Titans were mighty beyond imagining, vast and powerful, the first beings that could be said to rule rather than simply be. They divided the cosmos among themselves, each taking responsibility for different aspects, each working in their own domain. And for a time, all was well. The cosmos had structure and order. The divine family worked in harmony. Creation continued to elaborate itself, becoming more complex, more beautiful, more alive. But Gaia and Uranus did not stop with the 12 titans. They continued to produce children, and these next offspring were different, more primal, more monstrous, more disturbing to contemplate. First came 3 brothers, each born with a single eye in the center of his forehead, large and round and all-seeing. These were the Cyclopes, and their names told you what they were: Brontes, Thundersteropes, lightning; Arges, brightness. They were the powers of the storm made manifest, craftsmen of incredible skill who would one day forge weapons for the gods. When Brontes was born, Uranus looked upon his son's single eye and felt revulsion. This was not how gods should look. This was not natural. And when Steropes and Arges followed, each marked with the same strange deformity, Uranus's discomfort grew into disgust. These were his children, yes, but they were wrong somehow. Too different, too powerful, too unpredictable. He did not want them walking freely in the cosmos he was trying to order. And then came 3 more brothers, and these were even more alarming. Each had 50 heads sprouting from his shoulders. Each had 100 arms extending from his massive body. They were called the Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed ones, and their names were Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges. They were strength personified, able to throw 100 boulders simultaneously, able to restrain anything they grabbed, overwhelming and terrible. When they moved, the earth shook. When they spoke, the sound came from 50 mouths at once, a chorus of deep voices that could harmonize or argue with itself. Uranus looked upon the Hecatoncheires, and his revulsion turned to fear. These beings were too powerful. They could challenge him. They could disrupt the order he was establishing. And so he made a decision that would echo through all of creation, that would set in motion the pattern of divine succession, that would plant the seeds of his own destruction. He took the Cyclopes, those 3 strange brothers with their single eyes, and he seized the Hecatoncheires, those 3 overwhelming brothers with their 100 arms and 50 heads, and he stuffed them back into Gaia's body. Down into the depths of the earth he forced them, into dark caverns far below the surface, where they could not see the light, could not move freely, could not challenge his rule. He imprisoned his own sons in their mother's womb, in the dark places beneath the world. Imagine Gaia's pain. She had given birth to these children, had brought them forth through her own substance, and now they were forced back inside her, trapped, unable to emerge. The pressure was immense. The pain was constant. It was as if she were eternally pregnant, but never allowed to deliver, stretched and strained and filled with the writhing bodies of her imprisoned children. Some versions of the myth say Uranus imprisoned all his children at first, even the Titans, cramming them all back into Gaia's womb. Others say only the monstrous ones were imprisoned, the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires, who disturbed him most. But the effect was the same. Gaia was in agony, and she was angry. The rage of the earth is not something to dismiss lightly. It's not a human anger that burns hot and fades. It's geological anger, tectonic anger, the fury of mountains and earthquakes and volcanic fire. And so Gaia began to plot. If Uranus would not release her children, if he continued to abuse them out of his own fear and disgust, then he would have to be stopped. He would have to be overthrown. And for that, she would need an ally from among her other children. She would need one of the Titans to rise up, to rebel against their father, to commit an act so violent and fundamental that it would change the nature of the cosmos forever. She forged a weapon from her own substance, from the gray flint and adamant that formed her bones. She created a great sickle, The blade was sharp enough to cut through divine flesh, hard enough that no force could break it. It was both a farming tool and a weapon, the implement that severs, that harvests, that reaps. And she called her children together, the 12 Titans, and she held up this sickle, and she asked, "Which of you will help me? Which of you loves me enough, hates your father enough, is brave enough, or ambitious enough, or angry enough to strike him down?" The Titans looked at the sickle, and they looked at each other, and most of them said nothing. To strike one's father was a monstrous crime. It violated the natural order, the proper hierarchy, the way things should be. Yes, Uranus was cruel. Yes, he had imprisoned their siblings, but he was their father, the sky itself, and to raise a hand against him was unthinkable, all except one. Cronus, the youngest, stepped forward. His brothers were hesitant, bound by convention and fear, but Cronus looked at his mother's pain, looked at his father's tyranny, looked at that adamantine sickle glittering in Gaia's hand, and he saw an opportunity. Perhaps he was motivated by justice, perhaps by ambition, perhaps by simple hatred of being youngest, always last, always overlooked. Whatever moved him, he reached out and took the sickle from his mother's hand. "I will do it," he said, and Gaia smiled, a terrible smile, the smile of the earth when it decides to shake, and she began to explain her plan. The castration of Uranus and the separation of earth and sky. The plan Gaia devised was as clever as it was brutal. She knew her husband's habits, knew his patterns, knew the regular rhythm of his desires. Each night, as darkness fell, Uranus would descend from his position arching over the earth. He would come down and spread himself across Gaia, covering her completely in his embrace, his vast form blocking out the stars, bringing darkness as he lay with his wife. It was during these unions that Gaia's children had been conceived, and it would be during one of these unions that Cronus would strike. Gaia created a hiding place for her son, a concealed spot where he could wait unseen while his father descended. Some accounts say she carved out a cave or hollow within herself. Others say Cronus simply hid at the edge of the world, where earth met sky, ready to spring out at the right moment, and she gathered Cronus's brothers, convinced 4 of them to help, Coeus, Creus, Hyperion, and Iapetus. Each would take a position at one of the 4 corners of the world. When Uranus came down, they would grab him, holding him at the 4 directions, north, south, east, and west, keeping him pinned and stretched while Cronus did what needed to be done. The night came. It came as all nights came, with Uranus descending to embrace his wife. He spread himself across her, vast and dark, covering every part of her, consumed by desire and oblivious to the trap being set. And from their hiding places, the 5 brothers moved. Coeus, Creus, Hyperion, and Iapetus seized their father at the 4 corners, grabbed him tight with divine strength, holding him spread-eagled across the earth. Uranus struggled, surprised and furious, but he could not free himself. The 4 Titans held firm, and from his hiding place, Cronus emerged with the gray sickle in his hand. There's no gentle way to describe what happened next. Cronus approached his struggling father, raised the adamantine blade, and with one sweeping motion severed Uranus's genitals. The sickle was so sharp, the blade so perfectly made, that it cut through divine flesh as easily as a mortal scythe cuts through wheat. The testicles and penis of the sky fell away, removed forever. The source of his procreative power hacked away in a single stroke. The blood that sprayed from that terrible wound fell onto Gaia, and she absorbed it. And from those drops of divine blood, from the violence of that moment, more beings were born. First came the Erinyes, the Furies, 3 terrible goddesses with bat wings and snakes in their hair, eyes that wept blood, and voices that could drive mortals mad. Their names were Alecto, Tisiphone, and Megaera, numbers of those who committed crimes against their own family, those who killed their kin or betrayed their blood, born from the blood of Uranus's castration. They embodied the cosmic principle that such violations must be avenged. From the same blood sprang the Gigantes, the giants, enormous beings of incredible strength who would one day war against the Olympian gods. Some were half man, half snake, with serpentine coils instead of legs. Others were fully humanoid but towering, powerful, wielding trees as clubs and hurling boulders like pebbles. They were the children of violence, born from a father's blood and a son's betrayal. And third from that blood came the Meliae, the nymphs of the ash trees. They were gentler spirits, though still born from violence, and they would serve as nurses to the infant god who would one day overthrow Cronus. Even from horror comes nurture, even from blood comes life. The cosmos was operating according to principles the Greeks understood instinctively. Nothing is wasted, everything transforms. Violence begets both vengeance and care. But Cronus was not done. He took the severed genitals of his father, those divine organs that had generated so many children, and he flung them far out to sea. They tumbled through the air and splashed into the waters near the island of Cyprus, where they floated on the surface. And something remarkable happened. The divine flesh and blood, the generative power of Uranus, mixed with the salt water of the sea. White foam began to gather around them, swirling and churning, and from that foam, from that mixture of violence and generation, seawater and divine sexuality, arose a goddess. She rose from the waves fully grown, standing on a shell or a bank of foam, depending on which poet you believe. Her name was Aphrodite, foam-born, and she was the most beautiful being ever to exist. She was desire incarnate, love and sexuality made divine, and her power would reach even the highest gods. Zeus himself would be susceptible to her, would father children by mortal women, because Aphrodite decreed it. She was born from castration, from violence, from the severing of male power, yet she embodied the irresistible attraction between beings, the force that drives all creation. She was paradox personified, beauty born from horror, love born from hate. Uranus, wounded and diminished, withdrew to the upper reaches of the sky. He pulled back, away from Gaia, away from the earth that had harbored his attacker. He would never again come down to embrace her, never again cover her completely, never again generate children. The separation of earth and sky, which had been forming since the beginning, was now complete and permanent. Where once Uranus had lain directly upon Gaia, now there was space between them, the gap we call atmosphere, the air through which birds would fly and clouds would drift. And as he withdrew, as he pulled away to nurse his wound and his rage, Uranus spoke a curse. His voice echoed across the cosmos, and every being heard it. "You have overthrown me," he said to Cronus, "but you will not hold power forever. What you have done to me shall be done to you in turn. Your own children will rise against you just as you have risen against me. The pattern you have established will be visited upon you. You will be overthrown." It was prophecy and curse intertwined, and it would hang over Cronus for all the ages of his reign. The Golden Age and the reign of Cronus. With Uranus wounded and withdrawn to the upper sky, Cronus stood triumphant. He had overthrown his father, freed his siblings from their fear, and now the cosmos was his to rule. He took the throne of heaven, assuming the role of king of the gods, and he chose his sister Rhea as his wife and queen. Together they would rule during what later Greeks would remember as the Golden Age, a time so perfect it seemed almost dreamlike when contrasted with the harsh realities of later existence. But first, there was the matter of what to do with the imprisoned siblings. The Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires, those strange and powerful brothers who Uranus had stuffed back into Gaia's womb, remained trapped in the darkness beneath the earth. You might think that Cronus, having overthrown his father, partly to free free these brothers would immediately release them. You would be wrong. Cronus looked at the Cyclopes with their single burning eyes, looked at the Hecatoncheiras with their 100 arms and 50 heads, and he felt the same fear his father had felt. These beings were too powerful, too unpredictable, too dangerous. What if they challenged his rule? What if they decided they should be kings instead? Better to leave them where they were, locked away where they could not threaten the new order he was establishing. It was the first sign that Cronus would not be so different from the father he had overthrown. The first hint that power corrupts, that those who seize thrones become jealous of them, that revolution does not always bring the freedom it promises. Gaia must have felt the bitter sting of betrayal. She had helped Cronus specifically to free her imprisoned children, and now he kept them imprisoned still, but she was patient. The earth is always patient, and she would remember this betrayal when the time came. For now, though, the Golden Age began, and it truly was golden, at least according to the Greeks who looked back on it from their own troubled times. Under Cronus's reign, the world knew a peace and abundance it would never know again. There was no need for laws because everyone naturally did what was right. There was no need for agriculture because the earth provided food freely, without toil or cultivation. Trees bore fruit year-round. The ground yielded grain without plowing. Honey dripped from oak trees, and streams ran with milk and wine. This was when the first race of humans appeared in some versions of the myth, though we'll talk more about humanity's creation later. These Golden Age humans lived like gods themselves, without pain, without aging, without suffering. They had everything they needed, and when their long lives finally ended, they died peacefully, falling asleep and never waking, passing into death as gently as drifting into dreams. After death, they became benevolent spirits who watched over the living, blessing crops and protecting travelers. It was paradise, or as close to paradise as the cosmos would ever achieve. Cronus ruled with Rhea at his side, and his siblings took their places in the cosmic order. Oceanus and Tethys generated the rivers and oceanids. Hyperion and Theia gave birth to the sun, moon, and dawn, establishing the rhythm of days and seasons. Caius and Phoebe, Creus and his wife, Iapetus and his line, all began to produce offspring, populating the world with a second generation of divine beings, each with their own powers and domains. But there was a shadow over this golden time, and that shadow was Uranus's curse. Your own children will rise against you. The words haunted Cronus. He tried to dismiss them, tried to tell himself that he was different, that he would be a better father, that the pattern would not repeat. But late at night, when he lay beside Rhea, the curse would whisper in his mind. What if it was true? What if his children did overthrow him? What if all this glory, all this power, all this perfect order would be torn away by his own offspring? The fear grew in him like a cancer. It poisoned his peace, turned his thoughts dark, made him see threats where none existed. And when Rhea came to him, radiant and joyful, to tell him she was pregnant with their first child, Cronus felt not joy, but terror. The pregnancy progressed, and Cronus's paranoia grew with it. He consulted oracles, seeking guidance, hoping to be told the curse was meaningless. Instead, every prophecy confirmed his fears. One of your children will overthrow you just as you overthrew your father. The pattern will repeat. You cannot escape it. Unless, Cronus thought, unless the children never grow to adulthood, unless they never develop their powers, unless they simply never get the chance. When Rhea gave birth to their first child, a daughter, the infant came into the world perfect and divine. Her name was Hestia, and she would have become the goddess of the hearth and home, the sacred fire at the center of every household. But Rhea barely had time to hold her before Cronus Cronus snatched the baby from her arms. Rhea watched in horror as her husband opened his mouth impossibly wide and swallowed their newborn daughter whole. Down into his belly went Hestia, alive but trapped, unable to grow, unable to emerge, imprisoned in darkness just as the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires were imprisoned beneath the earth. Rhea screamed and wept and begged, but Cronus was implacable. The prophecy was clear. His children were a threat. This was the only way to be safe. The pattern repeated with terrible regularity. Rhea would give birth, and before she could even nurse the child or sing a lullaby or count its tiny fingers, Cronus would take it and swallow it whole. After Hestia came Demeter, who would have been goddess of the harvest and agriculture. Down she went into their father's belly. Then Hera, who should have been queen of the gods, regal and powerful, she too was swallowed. Hades came next, dark-eyed and serious, destined to rule the underworld. He lasted mere moments in the light before disappearing into Cronus's stomach. Each swallowing broke Rhea's heart again. Each time she hoped he would relent, that some paternal instinct would awaken, that he would look at his newborn child and feel love stronger than fear. Each time she was disappointed. Cronus's paranoia had consumed him completely. He had become exactly what he had rebelled against, a father who imprisoned his children out of fear of losing power. The fifth child was Poseidon, who would have commanded the seas with his trident, who would have been master of all waters and bringer of earthquakes. He too was snatched away and devoured before Rhea could protest. 5 children, 5 powerful gods, all trapped inside their father, alive in the darkness, aware but helpless, unable to grow or escape. Rhea's grief was beyond measure. Every time she felt new life quickening in her womb, she knew what awaited. The joy of pregnancy was poisoned by the certainty of loss. She would carry the child for months, feel it moving inside her, dream of holding it and watching it grow, only to have it stolen and swallowed the moment it was born. The golden age, for her, was an age of unending mourning. But when she became pregnant for the 6th time, when she felt this new life growing within her, something changed. She could not bear to lose another child. She could not endure that heartbreak again. And so she went to her mother, to Gaia, and she wept and begged for help. Gaia had not forgotten what Cronus had done, how he had kept the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires imprisoned despite his promises. She had no love left for this son who had become a tyrant, and she looked at her daughter's tears, felt the weight of 5 imprisoned grandchildren, and she decided that the pattern would continue. If Uranus had been overthrown by Cronus, then Cronus would be overthrown by his children. The wheel would turn again. Together, Gaia and Rhea devised a plan, and this plan would save the 6th child and doom Cronus's reign and set in motion the events that would transform the cosmos into the world the Greeks knew and worshipped, the secret birth of Zeus. As Rhea's time approached, as she felt the contractions beginning that signaled the birth of her 6th child, she did not stay in the palace where Cronus could watch her. Instead, she traveled in secret, far from his eyes, across the wine-dark sea to the island of Crete, that mountainous land at the crossroads of the ancient world. There, in the heights where eagles soared and the air was thin and clean, she sought out a cave. The exact location of the cave has been debated for millennia. Some say it was the Idaean Cave, high on Mount Ida, Crete's tallest peak, a deep cavern carved into the limestone by eons of water flow. Others claim it was the Dictaean Cave, also called Psychro Cave, in the central mountains, a 2-chambered grotto with a crystalline pool in its depths. Both caves still exist, both are sacred places, and perhaps the truth is that the precise location matters less than what happened there. In that dark cave, surrounded by stone and silence, far from her husband's tyrannical presence, Rhea gave birth. The child emerged strong and healthy, his cries echoing off the cave walls. It was a boy, and she named him Zeus, a name that means bright or sky or day. to the ancient Indo-European word for the luminous heavens. He was her last hope, her final child, the one who would either be devoured like his siblings or somehow, impossibly, survive to fulfill the prophecy. But there was no time for maternal joy, no time to nurse him or bond with him or simply hold him close. Rhea wrapped the infant Zeus in soft cloth and handed him to attendants who waited in the shadows. These were the curettes, sometimes described as warrior priests, sometimes as minor deities, sometimes as the offspring of the Meliae who had sprung from Uranus's blood. Whoever they were, they took the baby Zeus and promised to guard him, to raise him in secret, to protect him from his father's knowledge. Then Rhea performed the crucial deception. She took a large stone, roughly the size and weight of a newborn infant, and wrapped it carefully in swaddling clothes. She bundled it so it would feel right in Cronus's hands, look convincing in the dim light of the palace. And with this stone baby cradled in her arms, she returned to her husband. When Rhea presented Cronus with the bundle, he barely glanced at it. He had done this 5 times before. He knew the routine. He took the wrapped bundle from Rhea's hands, opened his mouth wide, and swallowed it whole. The stone tumbled down his divine throat and landed in his belly, alongside his 5 imprisoned children, and Cronus felt relief flood through him. 6 children now, all safely contained, unable to grow or threaten him. The prophecy, he believed, had been thwarted. He was safe. The irony, the dark comedy of this moment, was not lost on later Greek audiences. Here was the mighty Cronus, lord of the Golden Age, ruler of the cosmos, cunning enough to overthrow his own father, and yet he couldn't tell the difference between a baby and a rock. His paranoia had made him careless. His fear had blinded him. He swallowed the stone without question because he wanted to believe he had neutralized the threat. And we believe what we want to believe, even when we're gods. Meanwhile, back in the cave on Crete, Zeus grew, but raising a divine infant in secret presented unique challenges. His cries alone could have alerted Cronus to his existence, echoing across the mountains and sea, reaching divine ears hundreds of miles away, and so the Curettes devised a solution both ingenious and loud. Whenever baby Zeus cried, whenever he wailed for milk or comfort, the Curettes would gather around the cave entrance and perform a ritual dance. They would clash their spears against their bronze shields, creating a tremendous noise, a metallic percussion that drowned out the infant's cries. The sound rang through the mountains, echoing off the peaks, a constant clanging that became part of the soundscape of Crete. Any divine being who heard it would simply think the Curettes were performing one of their ceremonies, never suspecting that beneath that noise, a baby god was growing stronger day by day. Zeus was nursed by Amalthea, and here the myths diverge. Some say Amalthea was a goat, a divine she-goat who suckled the infant Zeus with her rich milk. Others say she was a nymph who owned a goat and fed Zeus with the animal's milk, or who fed him both goat's milk and honey from sacred bees. The details vary, but the essential point remains. Zeus drank divine nourishment, food fit for a king of gods, and he grew strong on it. The goat, or Amalthea herself if she was a nymph, became so precious to Zeus that in later years, after all his triumphs, he would honor her memory. Some say he made her hide into the aegis, his famous shield or breastplate, an invulnerable armor that would protect him in battle. Others say he placed her image among the stars as the constellation Capricorn, ensuring she would be remembered for all time. There's something touching about this. The greatest god honoring the humble goat who nursed him, never forgetting where he came from. As Zeus grew from infant to child to adolescent to young god, he was educated by his guardians. He learned to fight, trained in combat with spear and shield under the Curettes' tutelage. He learned to think strategically, to plan and scheme and outwit opponents. But more importantly, he learned the truth of his birth, the story of his father's paranoia and his mother's father's desperation, the knowledge that 5 siblings lay trapped in Cronus's belly, waiting to be freed. The more Zeus learned, the more his determination grew. He would not hide forever in this cave. He would not let his father's tyranny continue. The prophecy that haunted Cronus would be fulfilled, not because fate demanded it absolutely, but because Zeus would make it happen. He would return to challenge his father. He would free his siblings. He would overthrow the Titan king and establish a new order. But overthrowing a being as powerful as Cronus would require more than just courage and determination. It would require allies, strategy, and most crucially, it would require a way to force Cronus to regurgitate the 5 gods he had swallowed. Zeus needed help, and he found it in an unlikely place. Her name was Metis, and she was one of the Oceanids, a daughter of the Titans Oceanus and Tethys. Her name literally meant cunning intelligence or wise counsel, and she embodied that trait perfectly. She was clever, resourceful, able to see solutions where others saw only problems. And when Zeus sought her out, explained his situation, and asked for her help, she agreed immediately. Together, Zeus and Metis devised the plan that would begin the revolution, and it was a plan that relied not on force but on trickery, on deception, on turning Cronus's own body against him. Metis would brew a special potion, a mixture so powerful it would compel even a Titan's divine stomach to rebel and expel what it had swallowed. The ingredients varied depending on who told the story. Mustard and wine in some accounts, special herbs and magical compounds in others. But whatever it contained, the potion would force Cronus to vomit up his children. The challenge would be getting Cronus to drink it, and for that, Zeus would need to get close to his father without being recognized. He would need to disguise himself to become someone harmless and unremarkable, someone who could approach the king of the Titans without raising suspicion. And so Zeus, now fully grown and powerful, took on the role of a simple cupbearer. He arrived at Cronus's palace not as a challenger but as a servant, a young god seeking employment. Humble and forgettable Cronus, who had never seen his youngest son, who didn't even know Zeus had survived, had no reason to suspect this new attendant was anything other than what he appeared to be. For days, or perhaps weeks, Zeus played his role perfectly. He poured wine for the Titans, served at their feasts, kept his head down and his eyes averted. He waited for the right moment, the perfect opportunity, the instant when he could slip Metis's potion into Cronus's cup without being noticed. And when that moment came, when the feast was at its height and the wine flowing freely and Cronus's cup needed refilling, Zeus poured the potion. It mixed with the wine, invisible and odorless, and when Cronus lifted the cup to his lips and drank deeply, his fate was sealed. The effect was not immediate. The potion needed time to work, to spread through even a Titan's massive divine body, to trigger the violent rebellion of his stomach. But when it hit hard. Cronus doubled over, his face contorting in agony. His stomach churned and heaved. He tried to fight it, tried to maintain control, but his body was no longer his to command. And then he began to vomit, violently and uncontrollably. And what came up was not wine or food. First came the stone, the one he had swallowed last, still wrapped in its ancient swaddling clothes. It tumbled out of his mouth and hit the floor with a heavy thud, revealed at last for what it truly was. Cronus stared at it in shock and dawning horror as he realized he had been tricked. But the stone was only the beginning. His stomach heaved again, and out came Poseidon, fully grown, divine and powerful, shaking off the digestive juices and standing tall. Another convulsion, and Hades emerged, grim and dark-eyed, his years of imprisonment having given him an affinity for darkness and the depths. Hera came next, regal even in her undignified arrival, her eyes already burning with the anger she would carry forever. Then Demeter, golden-haired and strong, and finally Hestia, the first swallowed and the last freed, gentle and steadfast. 5 gods stood before Cronus, 5 children he had tried to prevent from ever growing powerful, now at full strength and united in their fury. They had been conscious all those years inside his belly. They had felt every moment of their imprisonment. They had heard his voice, felt his movements, experienced the world only through the walls of their prison, and their rage at what he had done to them, at the years stolen from them, at the sheer violation of their imprisonment, was absolute and implacable. Zeus, throwing off his disguise, revealed himself. "I am your son," he declared, "the one you thought you had swallowed, the one Rhea saved, and now your reign ends." The confrontation that followed was brief but intense. Cronus, still weak from the potion, still reeling from the shock of seeing his children before him, tried to fight, but he was alone, and they were 6. His siblings, the other Titans, rushed to his defense, but the lines were already being drawn for a much larger conflict. This would not be a simple coup. This would be war. The Titanomachy was about to begin, the 10-year war. The Titanomachy. The cosmos held its breath as 2 armies assembled for a war that would determine who ruled existence itself. On one side stood the Titans, the elder gods who had reigned during the Golden Age, led by Cronus, despite his weakening grip on power. On the other stood the Olympians, as Zeus and his siblings would come to be called, young and fierce and burning with righteous fury. But before the first blow was struck, Zeus knew he needed more than just his 5 siblings. He needed overwhelming force, needed allies so powerful that victory would be assured, and he knew exactly where to find them. Zeus descended into Tartarus, that bottomless abyss beneath the earth where darkness was so thick it seemed solid. The journey alone would have killed a mortal, crushed them under the weight of stone and shadow and distance, but Zeus was the son of Titans, divine and powerful, and he was driven by necessity. He needed to reach the deepest chambers, the most secure prisons, where the most dangerous beings in existence had been locked away since the dawn of time. He found them in the uttermost depths. The Cyclopes, those 3 brothers with single burning eyes, had been imprisoned here by Uranus, then kept imprisoned by Cronus despite his promises. Brontes, Steropes, and Arges, thunder, lightning, and brightness, masters of fire and metalwork, capable of crafting wonders beyond imagining, they had languished in darkness for eons, forgotten by the world above, abandoned by the gods who should have been their family. Beside them were the Hecatoncheires, even more terrible and magnificent, Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges, each with 50 heads sprouting from massive shoulders, each with 100 arms extending from their bodies, capable of throwing 100 boulders simultaneously, able to restrain anything they grabbed. They were strength personified, overwhelming and unstoppable. Zeus approached them not with commands, but with respect. He struck the chains that bound them, shattering the adamantine links that had held them for so long. As the bonds fell away, these ancient beings looked at their liberator with wonder. Here was someone who remembered them, who saw not monsters but allies, who valued their power instead of fearing it. "I free you," Zeus said, "and I ask for your help. The Titans who imprisoned you, who kept you locked away out of fear, must be overthrown. Join me, fight beside me, and when we win, you will have a place of honor in the new order. No more chains, no more darkness, no more being treated as threats instead of family." The Cyclopes were the first to respond. In gratitude for their liberation, they set to work immediately, putting their divine craftsmanship to use. They stoked their forges, hammered at their anvils, and created weapons of such power that they would become symbols recognized for millennia. For Zeus, they forged the thunderbolt, and it was a masterpiece, not a simple spear, but a weapon of elemental fury, crackling with electricity, capable of splitting mountains and igniting the sky. When Zeus held it, essence of the storm made tangible and controllable. It would become his signature weapon, his symbol, the thing by which all would know him across ages. The thunderbolt represented not just destructive power, but authority, the divine right to rule from the heights. For Poseidon, they crafted a trident, three-pronged and devastating. It could strike the earth and raise earthquakes, making the ground heave and crack. It could command the seas, stirring them to storm or calming them to glassy smoothness. With this weapon, Poseidon would become lord of all waters, able to affect the world's foundations as easily as its surface. For Hades, they created a helm of invisibility, a cap of darkness that rendered its wearer unseen even by other gods. It was a perfect weapon for the one who would eventually rule the underworld, allowing him to move through both the lands of the living and the dead without being perceived. In battle, it would let him strike from impossible angles, appearing and disappearing like a nightmare. The Hecatoncheires needed no weapons. Their 100 arms were weapons enough, but they pledged their strength to Zeus's cause, promising to fight with all their overwhelming power. And with these allies secured, with divine weapons in hand, Zeus and his siblings prepared for war. The two armies established their strongholds. Cronus and the Titans who supported him took Mount Othrys as their base, a great peak in the Thessaly region of Greece. There they gathered their forces, the elder gods who had ruled during the Golden Age. Most of the male Titans stood with Cronus. Oceanus brought the power of the world-encircling river, though in some accounts he remained neutral. Hyperion contributed his mastery of light. Crius, Coeus, and Iapetus all rallied to their brother's defense. They were mighty, these Titans, beings who had existed since near the beginning of time, whose power had shaped the cosmos. But not all Titans sided with Cronus. Themis, goddess of divine law and justice, sided with Zeus, recognizing that cosmic order demanded a change in leadership. Her daughter Prometheus, the Titan of forethought, whose name literally meant thinking ahead, also supported the Olympians. He could see the future unfolding, could calculate probabilities and outcomes, and he knew with certainty that Zeus would win. It was simply a matter of choosing the winning side. Most of the female Titans, the Titanesses, remained neutral. They had watched Cronus devour his children, had seen Rhea's suffering, and they wanted no part of this war between fathers and sons. Rhea herself certainly did not fight for the husband who had caused her such pain. Perhaps some of them remembered that Cronus had kept the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires imprisoned despite his promises. Perhaps they simply understood that this was the natural cycle, that sons must overthrow fathers, that change was inevitable. Zeus and his siblings established their base on Mount Olympus, the highest peak in Greece, soaring nearly 3,000 meters into the sky. From its summit, you could see across vast distances, across the plains and valleys, all the way to the sea. It was the perfect command center, elevated and defendable, close to the heavens, and it would become synonymous with divine power, its name forever linked with the gods who fought from its heights. The war lasted 10 years. Think about that. 10 years of constant battle between beings of godlike power, a full decade of the cosmos shaking under the strain of divine combat. Hesiod, trying to describe it centuries later, struggled to find words adequate to the task. How do you describe what happens when gods fight? When immortals who embody fundamental forces of nature unleash their full power against each other? The battles defied mortal comprehension. Zeus hurled his thunderbolts, and the sky became an endless lightning storm. Day and night merged into constant flickering brightness, thunder rolling without pause, until it seemed like the sound would shatter the world. Each bolt struck with pinpoint accuracy, directed by his will, and where they hit, the earth exploded. Mountains cracked, stones melted to glass. Poseidon struck the ground with his trident, and earthquakes earthquakes rippled out from the impact. The earth heaved like a stormy sea. Valleys became mountains. Mountains collapsed into plains. Rivers changed their courses. Lakes drained or appeared overnight. The very geography of the world was being rewritten with every blow. Hades used his helm of invisibility to strike from unexpected angles, appearing behind Titan lines, creating confusion and fear. You couldn't defend against what you couldn't see. The Titans would turn to face Zeus's thunderbolts, only to be attacked from behind by an invisible force. And the Hecatoncheires, those three brothers with their 100 arms and 50 heads, proved worth their liberation 1,000 times over. Each one could throw 100 boulders simultaneously, creating a storm of stone that no defense could withstand. They stood at the front lines, their 100 hands never tiring, their 50 heads shouting war cries in a chorus that echoed across the battlefield. When the Titans charged forward, mighty and terrible, they were driven back by this relentless barrage of stone and sound. The heat of the battle was so intense that Hesiod says chaos itself felt it. That primordial void from which everything had emerged was seized by an astounding heat, as if the violence of the war might undo creation, might reverse the process that had brought order from emptiness. The universe seemed to cry out under the strain. Reality itself stressed to its breaking point. Neither side could gain a decisive advantage for years. The Titans were experienced, unified, fighting to maintain the order they had established. But the Olympians were desperate, passionate, fighting not just for power, but for their right to exist outside their father's belly. They fought with the fury of the young, the determination of those who have nothing to lose and everything to gain. Slowly, gradually the tide began to turn. Zeus's thunderbolts struck with unerring accuracy, each one weakening the Titan lines. Poseidon's earthquakes destabilized Mount Othrys itself, making it difficult for the Titans to maintain their defensive positions. The Hecatoncheires' endless barrage wore down even the strongest Titan warriors, and the Olympians, younger and perhaps more adaptable, learned and adjusted their tactics as the war progressed. The final assault came in the 10th year, when both sides were exhausted, when the cosmos itself seemed weary of war. Zeus gathered all his remaining power, summoning storms unlike any the world had witnessed. The sky went black with clouds so thick they blocked out all light. Lightning fell like rain, thousands of bolts striking simultaneously, each one hitting with devastating precision. The thunder was so loud, it seemed to shake the foundations of Tartarus itself. At the climax of this ultimate assault, Zeus released his most powerful thunderbolt yet, a weapon of such force that it lit up the entire cosmos for one brilliant instant. That bolt struck Mount Othrys and split it down to its roots. The mountain cracked open, its peak shattered, its slopes collapsing in massive landslides. The Titans, already weakened by years of combat, already discouraged by the relentless assault, finally broke. Their formation shattered, their unity dissolved. Some tried to flee, others fought to the last, but one by one they were captured by the triumphant Olympians. Cronus himself stood alone at the end. His brothers had fallen or fled. His weapons were broken. His power was exhausted. Before him stood Zeus, the son he had tried to prevent from ever drawing breath. Now the victor of the greatest war the cosmos had known. There was no mercy in that moment. Zeus and his siblings seized the defeated Titans and dragged them down into Tartarus, into the same abyss where the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires had once been imprisoned. Down they went, past the roots of the earth, past the realm that would become Hades's underworld, down to the deepest pit where eternal darkness reigned. Poseidon forged a massive bronze gate to seal the entrance, set with locks that only he could open, and to guard it, to ensure the Titans could never escape. The Hecatoncheires took up residence. They settled at the gates of Tartarus, grateful to Zeus for their liberation, content now to serve as jailers for those who had supported Cronus's tyranny. Cronus and his brothers would spend eternity there, locked in darkness, their power broken, their reign ended. Some later accounts say Zeus eventually showed mercy, that after countless ages he released Cronus to rule the Isles of the Blessed, a paradise for the favored dead. But that was much, much later, if it happened at all. For now, Cronus's fate was imprisonment, and his golden age was over. The war was won. The Titanomachy had concluded with total victory for the Olympians, but now came new questions. How would they divide the cosmos? Who would lead? What would become of the world now that the old order had been swept away? The answer would shape the world that humans would inherit. The division of the cosmos. With the Titans defeated and imprisoned, with the war finally over, the victorious gods stood among the ruins of the battlefield and faced a new challenge. They had overthrown the old order, but what would replace it? How would power be divided? Who would rule what? They had fought together, but now they needed to determine the hierarchy, the structure, the new cosmic arrangement. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades were the three brothers, the male children of Cronus and Rhea, and they were the most powerful of the Olympians. It was clear that they would be the primary rulers, but none of them wanted to simply defer to the others. They had all fought equally hard. They had all spent years imprisoned in their father's belly. They all deserved power. They decided to settle the matter by drawing lots, leaving the decision to fate rather than fighting among themselves. They had just spent 10 years at war. None of them wanted to immediately start another conflict, this time against each other. It was the fairest solution, random and impartial, and all three agreed to abide by the results. The lots were drawn, and the cosmos was divided. Zeus drew the sky and the upper air, the realm of clouds and storms and weather, the domain from which he could look down upon everything below. It was the highest position, literally and figuratively, the place of greatest visibility and authority. From the heights of Mount Olympus, Zeus would rule over gods and mortals alike, his word becoming law, his power unmatched. He would be king of the gods, lord of the heavens, supreme among the divine. His thunderbolts would enforce his will, and his decrees would shape the world. Poseidon drew the seas, all the waters of the world, from the greatest oceans to the smallest streams and rivers. He would be master of the waves, lord of the deep, the god who could calm or stir the waters with a gesture of his trident. The sea was vast, covering more of the world's surface than the land, unpredictable and powerful in its own right. It was a worthy realm for one as mighty as Poseidon, though he would always chafe slightly at being subordinate to his younger brother. In some myths, this resentment would flare into conflict, but for now, Poseidon accepted his lot and took his throne beneath the waves. Hades drew the underworld, the realm of the dead, the shadowy place beneath the earth, where all mortal souls would eventually journey. At first glance, it seemed like the worst lot, the consolation prize, a grim and joyless realm far from the brightness of Olympus and the beauty of the seas. Hades himself may have felt disappointment initially, but in truth, his domain was immense and vital. Every mortal who ever lived would eventually fall under his rule. His subjects would eventually outnumber those of his brothers many times over, and all the riches buried in the earth, the gold and silver and precious gems, belonged to him by right, making him the wealthiest of the gods. He would become lord of the underworld, stern and impartial, rarely leaving his realm, but absolute within it. The earth itself and Mount Olympus were declared common ground, belonging to all three brothers equally. No one could claim sole dominion over Gaia, for she was their grandmother, the foundation from which they had all ultimately come. She would remain independent, powerful in her own right, watching watching as new generations rose and fell, as the pattern of succession continued its eternal cycle, the establishment of the Olympian order. With the cosmos divided among the three brothers, Zeus ascended to the throne of heaven and took up residence on Mount Olympus. That highest peak, snow-capped and magnificent, would become the center of divine power, the place from which the new order would be established. Zeus began to gather the other gods around him, creating a court, a family, a pantheon that would shape Greek religion and culture for millennia. He married Hera, his sister, making her queen of the gods and goddess of marriage and family. It was a union that seemed appropriate on the surface, the king and queen ruling together, but it would prove turbulent and troubled Zeus, for all his power and wisdom could not remain faithful. His eye wandered constantly to mortal women, to nymphs, to other goddesses, and each of his affairs would provoke Hera's jealous rage. She would become famous for her vengeance, pursuing Zeus's lovers and their children with relentless fury. But she was also regal, powerful, and essential to the Olympian order, the embodiment of legitimate marriage and queenship. Around Zeus and Hera, the other Olympians took their places. These were the 12 Olympians, though the exact membership of this group varied depending on which tradition you followed. Some were children of Cronus and Rhea, Zeus's siblings. Others were Zeus's own offspring, born from his many unions. Together they formed the pantheon, the divine family that would rule from Olympus. Hestia, the gentlest of the Olympians, became goddess of the hearth and home. She was the sacred fire at the center of every household, the warmth that made a house into a home. She was offered the first portion of every sacrifice, honored before all other gods, because without the hearth there could be no civilization, no gathering place, no center to domestic life. In some traditions, she would eventually give up her seat among the 12 to Dionysus, preferring peace and quiet to the drama of Olympian politics. Demeter, golden-haired and bountiful, became goddess of agriculture and the harvest. She taught humans how to plant and reap grain, how to make bread from wheat, how to live off the land through their own efforts rather than depending on nature's random bounty. She would later have a daughter, Persephone, whose abduction by Hades would explain the seasons, why the earth dies in winter and comes alive in spring. But that story was still to come. Athena was born in the most unusual way, not from a mother's womb, but from Zeus's own head. He had swallowed her mother Metis, the Oceanid who had helped him overthrow Cronus, after hearing a prophecy that Metis would bear children more powerful than their father. But the child could not be stopped so easily. Athena grew inside Zeus's skull until the pressure became unbearable. Hephaestus had to split Zeus's head open with an axe, and from the wound sprang Athena, fully grown and fully armed in golden armor, her spear raised, and her war cry echoing across Olympus. She became goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, the patroness of heroes and craftsmen, embodying the intellectual and civilized aspects of conflict rather than its brutal chaos. Apollo and Artemis were twins, born to Zeus and the Titaness Leto. Their birth was difficult because Hera, jealous as always, had forbidden any land to give Leto refuge. Finally, the floating island of Delos offered sanctuary, and there Leto gave birth first to Artemis, who immediately helped her mother deliver her brother Apollo. Apollo became god of light, music, poetry, prophecy, and healing. He was the ideal of male beauty and youth, the archer whose arrows never missed, the musician whose lyre could charm even stones. His twin Artemis became goddess of the hunt, of wild animals, of the moon and wild places. She was virgin and fierce, protective of young women and children, roaming the forests with her band of nymph companions. Aphrodite, who had been born from the sea foam that gathered around Uranus's severed genitals, took her place among the Olympians as goddess of love, beauty, and desire. She was irresistible, her power reaching even the highest gods. Even Zeus was susceptible to her influence, though he eventually married her off to Hephaestus to prevent too much chaos. But she would have affairs with Ares, with Hermes, with mortals, because love and desire cannot be constrained by marriage vows, not even divine ones. Ares was the brutal god of war, son of Zeus and Hera, though Hera in some accounts conceived him alone, in retaliation for Zeus's solo birthing of Athena, where Athena represented strategic, honorable warfare. Ares embodied war's bloodlust, its chaos, its sheer violence. The Greeks actually didn't like him much, seeing him as necessary but dangerous, the personification of war's worst aspects. Even his own parents seemed ambivalent about him. Hephaestus was the divine smith, god of fire and metalwork and craftsmanship. His parentage is uncertain in the myths. Some say Zeus and Hera were his parents. Others say Hera birthed him alone, but he was born lame or deformed, and she threw him from Olympus in disgust. He landed in the sea and was raised by sea nymphs who taught him his craft. Despite his lameness, he became the greatest craftsman in existence, creating palaces for the gods, forging weapons and armor, making automatons and marvels. He was married to Aphrodite, though she was unfaithful to him, the beautiful goddess bound to the ugly smith, a pairing that showed both the Greeks' appreciation for irony and their understanding that outer beauty and inner worth don't always align. Hermes was Zeus's son by the nymph Maia, born in a cave on Mount Cyllene. On the day of his birth, he invented the lyre by stringing a tortoise shell with cowgut strings, then stole Apollo's cattle by making them walk backwards so their tracks would confuse pursuers. When Apollo confronted him, Hermes played the lyre so beautifully that Apollo agreed to trade his cattle for the instrument. Hermes became the messenger of the gods, the god of travelers, thieves, merchants, and communication. He wore winged sandals and carried a herald's staff, the caduceus, and he could move between all worlds, Olympus, earth, and underworld, serving as the psychopomp who guided souls to the afterlife. Dionysus was the youngest to join the Olympians, god of wine, celebration, ecstasy, and theater. He was son of Zeus and the mortal woman Semele, who died when she asked to see Zeus in his true divine form, and was incinerated by his glory. Zeus saved the unborn Dionysus by sewing him into his own thigh, carrying him to term, and giving birth to him in a second, unusual delivery. Dionysus wandered the world teaching viticulture, starting mystery cults, attended by wild maenads and satyrs. He was the god who broke boundaries, who brought mortals into ecstatic communion with the divine, whose worship was both beautiful and dangerous. These were the 12 Olympians, more or less, depending on whether you counted Hestia or Dionysus, whether you included Hades, who lived in the underworld rather than on Olympus. Together they formed the divine court, the family that would rule the cosmos and involve themselves endlessly in mortal affairs. They were more human than the Titans had been, more prone to passion and pettiness, jealousy and desire. They loved mortals and had children with them. They fought with each other, made alliances, broke oaths, held grudges. They were gods, but they were gods who felt and acted in ways humans could understand. Zeus ruled them all from his throne on Olympus, wielding the thunderbolt that reminded everyone of his authority. He was not an absolute tyrant. He listened to counsel, held assemblies where the gods could speak, usually respected Themis's divine laws. But when he decided something, his word was final. He was king of the gods, and that position came with both power and responsibility. The new order was was established. The cosmos had its structure. Heaven, earth, sea, and underworld all had their rulers. The gods had their domains and their relationships, but something was still missing. The world was beautiful, full of mountains and seas, forests and rivers, populated by all manner of animals and spirits, but it was empty of the beings who would give it ultimate meaning, who would worship the gods and give them purpose, who would build civilizations and create art and tell stories. The world needed mortals. It needed humanity. And that creation, that final crucial piece of the cosmic puzzle, would come not from Zeus or any of the Olympians, but from a Titan who had sided with Zeus during the war, one whose name meant forethought and whose love for his creation would lead him to defy the gods themselves. The creation of humanity, after the Titanomachy, after the cosmic order had been established, Zeus looked down from Olympus at the earth below and saw that while it was beautiful, it was incomplete. Animals roamed the forests and plains. Birds filled the skies. Fish swam in Poseidon's seas. But there was nothing that could appreciate creation's glory, nothing that could build cities, create art, worship the gods who ruled above, or understand the world through reason and craft. Zeus decreed that new creatures should be made, beings more complex than animals, capable of thought and speech, able to honor the gods with sacrifice and prayer. These would be mortals, not divine, not immortal, but intelligent and creative. And for this task of creation, Zeus turned to two Titans who had supported him during the war, two brothers who had earned his trust through their loyalty. Their names were Prometheus and Epimetheus, sons of the Titan Iapetus, grandsons of Uranus and Gaia. Their names told you everything about their characters. Prometheus meant forethought, the one who thinks ahead, who plans and considers consequences before acting. Epimetheus meant afterthought, the one who acts impulsively and realizes his mistake too late. They were opposites, these brothers, complementary in their differences, and together they were given the task of populating the earth with mortal creatures. Epimetheus, true to his nature, set to work immediately without much planning. He was enthusiastic, energetic, eager to fill the world with life. He began creating animals of every kind, and as he fashioned each one, he gave it gifts to help it survive. To some he gave strength, massive bodies that could overpower predators. To others he gave speed, swift legs that could outrun danger. Some received wings to escape into the sky. Others got thick fur to survive the cold, or shells to protect their soft bodies, or claws and teeth to defend themselves and hunt. He gave cunning to the fox, keen sight to the eagle, powerful jaws to the lion, the ability to burrow to the mole. He distributed size and shape, color and pattern, venom and antlers and hooves and fins. He worked quickly, joyfully, creating diversity and wonder, not noticing that he was using up all the available gifts, spending the entire store of attributes without keeping any in reserve. Meanwhile, Prometheus worked more slowly, more carefully. He was shaping something special, something that would be different from all the animals his brother was making. He took clay from the earth and water from rivers, mixing them together, and he began to mold figures in a shape that pleased him. He made them upright, walking on two legs rather than four, standing tall so they could look up at the heavens rather than down at the ground. He wanted them to resemble the gods in form, to be a link between the animal and divine realms. The goddess Athena, watching Prometheus work, was intrigued by these clay figures. She descended from Olympus and breathed into them, giving them souls, giving them life, giving them something beyond mere physical existence. The clay figures became animate, became human, became the first members of a new species that would eventually call themselves mankind. But there was a problem. When Prometheus looked at his creation, he saw that humans were naked and helpless. They had no fur to keep warm, no claws to defend themselves, no speed to outrun predators, no venom to deter threats. Epimetheus had given away all the gifts to the animals, and there was nothing left for humanity. Humans were vulnerable, weak, barely able to survive in a world full of creatures better equipped than they were. Prometheus looked at these beings he had made, and he felt love. That's the crucial thing, the detail that makes everything that follows make sense. Prometheus loved humanity in a way the Olympian gods never quite would. To Zeus and the others, humans would be interesting playthings, worshippers who provided sacrifice, occasionally lovers or victims of divine whims. But to Prometheus, humanity was his creation, his children in a sense, and he could not bear to see them suffer. He decided they needed something to compensate for their physical weakness, something that would elevate them above the animals despite their fragile bodies. They needed fire. Now, fire in the ancient world was not just a source of heat and light. Fire was civilization. It was the tool that allowed humans to cook food, making more nutrients available and allowing larger brains to develop. It was protection against predators and cold. It was the heat needed to work metal, to create tools and weapons. Fire was technology, was culture, was the thing that separated thinking beings from animals. And in Greek myth, fire belonged exclusively to the gods. It was their domain, their privilege, and they had not granted it to mortals. But before Prometheus could steal fire for humanity, there was another confrontation with Zeus, another moment that would set God and Titan on a collision course. It happened at Mycenae, a place of sacrifice where gods and humans came together to feast. Zeus decreed that humans must sacrifice a portion of every animal they killed to the gods, an offering to honor the divine. But what portion? How should the sacrifice be divided? Prometheus, ever clever, offered to make the division. He butchered a great ox and divided it into 2 portions, but he arranged them deceptively. In one pile, he put all the best meat, the edible and nutritious parts, but he wrapped them in the ox's ugly stomach lining, making the pile look unappetizing. In the other pile, he put nothing but bones, inedible and worthless, but he wrapped them in a layer of rich, glistening fat, making them look delicious. Then he presented both piles to Zeus and asked him to choose which portion would belong to the gods, which to humans. It was a test, a trick, a way to secure the best part of sacrificial animals for humanity. Zeus looked at the 2 piles. He saw through Prometheus's deception immediately. He was not fooled, but he pretended to be, deliberately choosing the pile wrapped in fat, knowing it contained only bones. Perhaps he wanted to see how far Prometheus would go. Perhaps he was setting a trap of his own, or perhaps he simply accepted the choice because it established a precedent. From that day forward, humans would burn the bones and fat for the gods while keeping the meat for themselves. But Zeus was angry at the trick. He felt insulted, his dignity as king of the gods diminished by being deceived, even if he had seen through it. And so he decided on a punishment for humanity. If Prometheus loved these mortals so much, let him watch them suffer. Zeus took fire away from mankind. He removed it from the earth, brought it back to Olympus, forbade any god from sharing it with mortals. Humans, who had briefly known the comfort of flames, now sat in darkness and cold, unable to cook their food, unable to work metal, unable to protect themselves. Their situation became desperate, and Prometheus could not bear it. He looked at humanity shivering in the dark, saw them eating raw meat and living in fear, and he made a decision that would define his character for all of history. He would defy Zeus. He would steal fire back and give it to humanity, regardless of the consequences to himself. The theft of fire has been told many ways. Some say Prometheus climbed to Olympus while the gods feasted, distracted and drunk on nectar. Others say he approached the forge of Hephaestus and took coals from the divine smithy. The most common version says he went to the chariot of Helios, the sun, which rested at night in the western edge of the world, and he lit a torch from its flames. However he did it, Prometheus obtained fire, divine fire that belonged to the gods. But how to transport it to earth without being seen? He took the hollow stalk of a giant fennel plant, one of those thick stalks that grow throughout the Mediterranean, and he hid the burning coals inside it. The fennel stalk could hold the fire without burning too quickly, keeping it alive but concealed, and with this hidden flame, Prometheus descended to earth and gave fire back to humanity. He didn't just give them fire, he taught them how to use it, how to maintain it, how to cook and forge and stay warm. More than that, some myths say he gave them all the useful arts, taught them medicine and mathematics, astronomy and architecture, writing and navigation. He gave them the skills and knowledge that would allow them to survive and eventually thrive despite their physical weakness. He made them civilized. Zeus looked down from Olympus and saw smoke rising from human settlements, saw the glow of fires in the night, and his rage was absolute. Prometheus had defied him directly, had stolen what Zeus had forbidden, had placed his love for mortals above his obedience to the king of the gods. This could not stand. There would be punishment, and it would be terrible. But Zeus, in his anger, decided to punish not just Prometheus, but humanity itself. If mortals had fire because of Prometheus's love for them, then let them also have a curse, a punishment wrapped in beauty, evil disguised as a gift. Zeus commanded Hephaestus to create something new, something that had never existed before in the world. Hephaestus took clay and water, just as Prometheus had when making the first humans, but he shaped it differently. He created the first woman, Pandora, and the price of fire. Up until this moment, humanity had consisted only of men. The first humans Prometheus created from clay were all male, living simple lives, reproducing through some unspecified means if they reproduced at all. But now Zeus would introduce something new to the world, and with it would come complications that would change human existence forever. The woman Hephaestus created was beautiful beyond measure. He sculpted her with all his divine skill, making her lovely to look upon, graceful in movement, with a face that could capture any heart. But beauty was only the beginning. Zeus commanded all the Olympians to give her gifts, to make her irresistible and dangerous in equal measure. Athena dressed her in shimmering robes and taught her weaving and handicrafts, making her skilled in the domestic arts. Aphrodite poured charm over her, giving her grace and desire that would make men's hearts ache. The Graces adorned her with golden necklaces. The Hours crowned her with spring flowers. Apollo gave her musical talent. Every god contributed something, making her a masterpiece of divine craftsmanship. But Hermes, at Zeus's command, gave her two final gifts that would prove most significant. He gave her a deceptive mind and a lying tongue. He placed in her heart curiosity and cleverness, but also cunning and treachery. She would be beautiful and charming, but also manipulative and untrustworthy. She would be both gift and curse. They named her Pandora, which means all-gifted, because every god had given her something. And when she was complete, Zeus looked upon her with satisfaction. She was perfect for his purposes, beautiful enough that no man could resist her, dangerous enough to bring suffering to humanity, a punishment disguised as a present. Zeus gave Pandora a jar, a large ceramic vessel called a pythos, though later mistranslations would call it a box. He sealed the jar and told her never to open it, knowing full well that curiosity, which Hermes had placed in her heart, would eventually compel her to do exactly that. Inside the jar, Zeus had placed all the evils and hardships that would plague humanity. and sickness, sorrow and old age, death and despair, all the sufferings that would make mortal life difficult. Then Zeus sent Pandora down to earth as a gift for Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother. Some accounts say he sent her directly to Epimetheus, others say he gave her to all mankind. But the crucial detail is that she was presented to Epimetheus, the one whose name meant afterthought, the one who acted without thinking ahead. Now, Prometheus had warned his brother. He had told Epimetheus clearly, never accept a gift from Zeus. Whatever the king of the gods offers you, refuse it, because it will be a trap. Prometheus could see ahead, could understand that Zeus's anger would express itself in subtle and terrible ways. He tried to protect his brother from the consequences of his own theft of fire. But when Epimetheus saw Pandora standing before him, all warnings fled from his mind. She was so beautiful, so charming, so perfect. How could this be a trap? How could something so lovely be dangerous? Zeus had sent her as a gift, a gesture of goodwill. Surely it would be rude to refuse. And so, living up to his name, thinking only after acting, Epimetheus accepted Pandora and welcomed her into his home. For a time, all seemed well. Pandora lived among humans, and her presence changed their world. Some interpretations see her as the first woman from whom all other women would descend. The mother of the female sex. Others see her as symbolic, representing the introduction of female humanity, and with it the complexity of gender relations, family, and procreation in ways that would make human life both richer and more difficult. But that sealed jar sat in their home, mysterious and tantalizing. Pandora looked at it every day. Zeus had told her never to open it, and perhaps initially she obeyed, but curiosity, that gift from Hermes, gnawed at her. What was inside? Why was it forbidden? What could be so important that the king of the gods himself had sealed it? The temptation grew stronger each day. She would approach the jar, touch it, imagine opening it, then force herself to walk away. But curiosity is a powerful force, especially when it's been divinely implanted, and eventually, inevitably, Pandora gave in. She broke the seal, she lifted the lid, and immediately all the evils that Zeus had trapped inside came pouring out. They emerged like smoke or shadows or swarming insects, depending on which poet described it. Disease and plague flew out, bringing sickness to human bodies that had never known illness. Old age emerged, bringing decay and weakness to beings who had been eternally young. Toil and hard work appeared, meaning humans would now have to labor for their survival rather than living off nature's easy abundance. Sorrow and grief, pain and despair, all the sufferings of mortal existence escaped from the jar and spread across the world. Pandora, horrified at what she had done, tried to close the jar, to trap the evils back inside. But it was too late. They had already escaped, already infused themselves into human existence. The world that had been simple and relatively painless now became a place of suffering, where humans would have to struggle and strive and endure hardships throughout their lives. But one thing remained in the jar. When Pandora finally got the lid back on, one spirit had not yet escaped. It was hope. Why hope was in a jar full of evils, the myths never quite explain clearly. Some see it as the one good thing among the bad, the gift that allows humans to endure all the other sufferings. As long as hope remains, humans can face disease and age, toil and sorrow, believing that things might get better. Others interpret it more darkly. Hope was trapped in the jar, meaning humanity doesn't even have hope to comfort them, only the memory of it, the knowledge that it exists but remains forever out of reach. Or perhaps hope itself is an evil, the thing that keeps humans striving and suffering when they should simply accept their fate. Or maybe, in the most complex reading, hope remaining in the jar means it's the one thing under human control. All the other evils have been released and cannot be recalled. But hope is something humans can choose to open or keep closed, to embrace or reject, to use as a tool for survival. Regardless of the interpretation, the result was clear. Humanity's easy existence was over. The golden age, when humans lived like gods without suffering, had ended. Now mortal life would be hard. Humans would have to work for their food, would suffer sickness and pain, would grow old and die. They would know sorrow and loss, would struggle and fail and endure hardships. And this was the price of fire, the cost of Prometheus's gift. Zeus had given humanity civilization, technology, all the tools they needed to build complex societies, but he had also given them all the suffering that would make their lives difficult. It was a twisted kind of balance, a punishment that ensured humans would never live comfortably, would always have to fight for survival, despite having the intelligence to imagine something better. As for Prometheus himself, Zeus had not forgotten about him. The Titan who had defied the king of the gods, who had stolen fire and given it to mortals, who had placed his love for humanity above his obedience to divine authority. He would face a punishment so terrible it would become legendary, a warning to any who might think about defying Zeus's will. The punishment of Prometheus. Zeus summoned his servants, force and violence, Cronus and Gaia, and he commanded them to seize Prometheus. The Titan was taken far from Greece, far from Olympus, to the edge of the known world, where the great Caucasus Mountains rise like a wall between Europe and Asia. There, on a desolate peak where no mortal ventured, where the wind howled eternally and the snow never melted, Prometheus would serve his sentence. Hephaestus, the divine smith, was ordered to forge chains of unbreakable adamant and bind Prometheus to the mountain. Hephaestus did so reluctantly. He had sympathy for Prometheus, respected him as a fellow craftsman and benefactor of humanity, but he was bound to obey Zeus, and so he worked his forge and created bonds that no force could break. He drove stakes through Prometheus's wrists and ankles, pinning the Titan to the bare rock, arms spread wide, unable to move or escape. But Zeus was not satisfied with simple imprisonment. The punishment needed to be ongoing, needed to be painful, needed to last forever. And so he sent an eagle, a great bird sacred to himself, to visit Prometheus every day. The eagle would arrive each morning as the sun rose, would land on Prometheus's bound body, and would tear open his chest with its beak and talons. It would feast on his liver, that organ the Greeks believed was the seat of emotion and passion, eating it slowly while Prometheus screamed in agony. Because Prometheus was immortal, because Titans cannot die, his liver would regenerate each night, growing back fully by dawn, and the next morning the eagle would return, and the torture would begin again. Day after day, year after year, century after century, Prometheus suffered this punishment. Bound to his rock, unable to move, unable to escape, he endured endless cycles of pain, the eagle's beak tearing into his flesh, the agony of having his organs consumed while he remained conscious, the brief respite of night when his body healed, only to face the same torture again at sunrise. Some accounts say Prometheus remained defiant throughout his punishment. He never apologized, never begged for mercy, never regretted giving fire to humanity. He believed he had done the right thing, that humans deserved the gifts he had given them, that Zeus was wrong to punish mortals for Prometheus's actions. His suffering was the price of his compassion, and he bore it with as much dignity as endless torture allows. Other versions say Prometheus possessed knowledge that Zeus wanted, a secret about which of Zeus's children would eventually overthrow him, the same cycle that had seen Cronus overthrow Uranus and Zeus overthrow Cronus. Prometheus knew the answer, knew which goddess would bear the son destined to be greater than his father. Zeus offered to free Prometheus if he would reveal this secret, but Prometheus refused. It was his only leverage, the only power he held over the king of the gods, and he would not surrender it. The punishment lasted for thousands of years, or 30 years, or 13 generations, depending on which source you consult. Time operates differently in myths, serving the story's needs rather than historical accuracy. But the essential point is that Prometheus suffered for a very long time, bound to his rock, visited daily by the eagle, paying the price for his love of humanity. Eventually, he was freed, though the circumstances varied. In most accounts, the hero Heracles, traveling through the Caucasus during his 12 labors, came upon the bound Titan Heracles, who himself was Zeus's son, had sympathy for Prometheus, saw him as a benefactor who deserved mercy rather than eternal punishment. He drew his bow, took careful aim, and shot the eagle out of the sky, killing it with a single arrow. Then Heracles approached Zeus and pleaded for Prometheus's release. Perhaps Zeus had already learned the secret he wanted, the knowledge that he should not have children with the sea nymph Thetis because her son would be greater than his father. Perhaps Zeus felt his point had been made, his authority sufficiently demonstrated. Perhaps he simply respected his son's request. Whatever the reason, Zeus agreed to free Prometheus, but with one condition. The condition was that Prometheus must wear a ring made from the adamantine chains that had bound him, set with a piece of the Caucasus rock. This way, Zeus could claim that Prometheus was still technically bound to his punishment, still wearing his chains and still attached to the mountain, even if he was free to move about. It was a face-saving measure, a way for Zeus to show mercy without admitting he had been wrong. The Greeks who told this story would later adopt the custom of wearing rings in honor of Prometheus, remembering his suffering and his sacrifice for humanity, and Prometheus himself, freed at last, reconciled with Zeus, and took his place again among the divine beings, though he never forgot the price of his compassion. There's something profound in this myth, something that resonated deeply with the Greeks and continues to resonate today. Prometheus is the figure who suffers for bringing enlightenment to others, who endures punishment for trying to elevate humanity above mere animal existence. He represents the idea that knowledge and progress come with costs, that civilization itself is built on sacrifices, that sometimes defying authority is the right thing to do, even if it leads to suffering. The fire Prometheus stole was not just literal flame, but symbolic of all technology, all knowledge, all the things that separate thinking beings from animals, and the punishment he endured was the price of that theft, the suffering that comes with breaking natural law, with taking what belongs to the divine and giving it to mortals. But Pandora's story complicates this. Yes, Prometheus gave humanity fire and civilization, but with it came all the evils that make human life difficult. Was the trade worth it? Would humanity have been better off remaining simple and ignorant, but peaceful and free from suffering? Or is struggle essential to what makes us human? Is suffering the price of awareness? The Greeks didn't answer these questions definitively. They held both truths simultaneously, that Prometheus was a hero for helping humanity, and that his help brought consequences that made mortal life hard. Fire gave humans the tools to build civilizations, but it didn't guarantee they would use those tools wisely or well. The ages of humanity and the Great Flood. The Greeks had another way of thinking about humanity's decline from paradise, another framework for understanding why mortal life was full of struggle. This was the myth of the 5 ages of man, where humanity degenerated through successive generations, each one worse than the last, until reaching the present Iron Age of toil and trouble. The Golden Age came first. During Cronus's reign, before Zeus overthrew him, the first humans lived like gods themselves, without pain, without aging, without suffering. Food grew without cultivation. The earth provided everything freely. Humans had no need for laws because they naturally did what was right. They lived long lives in peace and plenty, and when they died, they simply fell asleep, passing away without pain. After death, their spirits became benevolent demons who watched over the living, blessing crops and protecting travelers. Then came the Silver Age. After Zeus took power, these humans were inferior to the first generation, more foolish, more childish. They took 100 years to mature, spending their entire youth as infants dependent on their mothers. When they finally reached adulthood, they lived only briefly, and they spent that time in folly, harming each other, refusing to honor the gods with proper sacrifice. Zeus was displeased with them and made them disappear. But they too became spirits after death, though lesser ones, dwelling beneath the earth as blessed souls, but no longer walking among the living. The Bronze Age followed, and these humans were terrible and strong, born from ash trees, violent and warlike. They had bronze armor, bronze weapons, bronze houses. They loved nothing but war, constantly fighting each other with savage fury. They were mighty but had no justice, no civilization, only strength and brutality. Eventually they destroyed themselves through their own violence, killing each other until none remained. They descended to Hades after death, nameless and forgotten, leaving no spirits to watch over the living. But then Zeus created a fourth generation, breaking the pattern of decline. These were the heroic age, the demigods who fought at Thebes and Troy, the legendary figures like Heracles and Achilles, Perseus and Theseus. They were more just and noble than the Bronze Age men, but they too fell in war and plague. Some died at Troy fighting over Helen, others perished in various conflicts and quests. When they died, Zeus granted the best of them a special afterlife in the Isles of the Blessed, a paradise at the edge of the world where heroes lived in eternal happiness, where the earth bore fruit 3 times a year and the troubles of mortal life never reached. Finally came the Iron Age, the present age, the time in which the Greeks themselves lived and which continues to this day. This was the age of toil and sorrow, when humans must work constantly for their survival, when justice is rare and might makes right, when children dishonor their parents and guests betray their hosts. It was an age of moral decline, of hard labor, of constant struggle. The Greeks looked around at their own world and saw it as the lowest point, the furthest fall from the Golden Age paradise. But there was a twist in this tale, another story that explained why the current humans existed at all. Between the ages there was a catastrophe, a great flood that destroyed almost all humanity, leaving only 2 survivors to repopulate the world. The great flood of Deucalion and Pyrrha. Zeus looked down from Olympus at the humans who populated the earth, and what he saw displeased him greatly. Humanity had become wicked, violent, and impious. They no longer honored the gods with proper sacrifice. They broke oaths without remorse. They murdered guests and strangers, violating the sacred laws of hospitality that Zeus himself enforced. The humans of the Bronze Age were particularly terrible, constantly at war, showing no mercy, no justice, no civilization. They were barely better than animals, and Zeus decided that they needed to be wiped away and replaced with a better generation. He decided to destroy humanity with a great flood, to wash the earth clean and start over. But first, he wanted to test them one final time to see if even a single human deserved to be saved. Zeus disguised himself as a poor traveler and went down to earth, wandering from city to city, knocking on doors, asking for hospitality. Everywhere he went, he was turned away. People slammed doors in his face, cursed him, threatened him with dogs and weapons. No one offered him food or shelter. No one showed the basic decency that even strangers deserved. In one city in Arcadia, ruled by a king named Lycaon, Zeus's test took a darker turn. Lycaon did invite Zeus in, but he suspected his guest might be divine. To test whether Zeus was truly a god, Lycaon committed an abomination. He killed one of his own sons, or a hostage or prisoner depending on the version, cooked the flesh, and served it to Zeus as part of the meal. It was meant to be a test. If Zeus was really divine, he would know what he was eating and reveal himself. Zeus knew immediately, of course, and his rage was terrible. He overturned the table, struck the palace with lightning, and transformed Lycaon into a wolf, a fitting form for someone who had acted with such savage brutality. The name Lycaon comes from the Greek word for wolf, and this transformation was one of the first stories of lycanthropy, of humans becoming wolves, that would echo through later European folklore. But Lycaon's crime was simply the final proof Zeus needed. Humanity was irredeemable. They had to be destroyed. And so Zeus returned to Olympus and began to plan the flood. He commanded the winds to blow storm clouds together. He called on Poseidon to stir the seas into fury, to send waves crashing over coastal lands. He told the river gods to overflow their banks, to abandon their channels and spread across the earth. Rain began to fall, not gentle showers but torrential downpours, sheets of water descending from the sky without pause. The earth, which had been dry, began to fill like a bowl. Rivers swelled and burst their boundaries. The sea rose and surged inland. Lakes expanded into inland seas. Day after day, week after week, the rain continued. Cities were submerged. Fields disappeared under water. Mountains became islands, then disappeared as the water rose higher. Animals and humans alike fled to higher ground, climbing desperately, only to be overtaken by the relentless rise of the flood. Almost all humanity perished in that deluge, drowned as the world they knew disappeared beneath the waves. But 2 people survived, and their survival was not accidental. They were chosen, saved because they were righteous, because they had honored the gods even when others turned away. Their names were Deucalion and Pyrrha. Deucalion was the son of Prometheus, the titan who had created humanity and stolen fire for them. Pyrrha was his wife, daughter of Epimetheus and Pandora, making her the child of afterthought and the first woman. They were the last generation of the old humanity, carrying in them the legacy of both creation and curse. Prometheus, with his gift of foresight, had warned his son that a great flood was coming. He told Deucalion to build a boat, a chest made of strong wood, large enough to hold provisions, and 2 people. Deucalion followed his father's advice, working quickly, building the boat in secret before the rains began. When the flood came, he and Pyrrha climbed into their vessel, bringing food and water, and sealed themselves inside. For 9 days and 9 nights, they floated on the endless sea that had consumed the world. They could hear nothing but the sound of rain and waves, could see nothing but water stretching to every horizon. They prayed to Zeus for deliverance, prayed to Themis for guidance, prayed to any god who might listen, that they would survive and see land again. Finally, on the 9th day, the rain stopped. The waters began to recede, slowly, gradually revealing the peaks of mountains. The chest carrying Deucalion and Pyrrha drifted until it came to rest on Mount Parnassus, the sacred mountain where Delphi stood, where the oracle of Apollo would one day prophesy the future. Or in other versions, they landed on Mount Othrys, the former stronghold of the Titans, or Mount Athos, or Mount Etna. The exact location varied, but the essential point was that they survived. When the waters had receded enough, Deucalion and Pyrrha emerged from their chest. They stepped out onto a world transformed, scoured clean by the flood, empty and silent. Every city was gone. Every person they had known was dead. They were the last humans alive, standing on a mountain in a world that had been wiped clean. They descended from the peak and went to the nearest shrine they could find, a temple of Themis that had somehow survived the flood, or perhaps that Themis had miraculously preserved. There they knelt and prayed, asking the goddess what they should do. How could two people repopulate an entire world? They were old, past the age of having many children. Even if they could, it would take generations upon generations to restore humanity to its former numbers. What did the gods expect of them? Themis answered their prayer with an oracle, but like most oracles, her words were cryptic and strange. "Depart from the temple with veiled heads and loosened robes," she said, "and cast behind you the bones of your great mother." Deucalion and Pyrrha were horrified. The bones of their mother? It sounded like they were being commanded to commit sacrilege, to dig up and desecrate the graves of their parents. How could the gods demand such a thing? But they pondered the oracle's words, trying to understand the hidden meaning, because divine commands always had layers, always required interpretation. Finally, Deucalion understood. "The Great Mother," he said, "is not our literal mother. It is Gaia, the earth herself. All humans come from the earth and return to it, and the bones of the earth are stones." It was brilliant interpretation. The rocks and stones that lay everywhere around them were the bones of Gaia, the solid skeleton of the world, and Themis was telling them to throw these stones behind them as they walked. Still not entirely understanding what would happen, but trusting in the goddess's wisdom, Deucalion and Pyrrha veiled their heads, loosened their robes in supplication, and began to walk, picking up stones and tossing them over their shoulders. The miracle happened immediately. The stones that Deucalion threw transformed as they hit the ground, softening, expanding, taking shape. They became men, strong and hardy, springing fully formed from the earth. The stones that Pyrrha threw became women, equally strong, ready to begin life anew. With each throw, another person appeared, until the mountainside was filled with humans, the new generation, humanity reborn from the bones of the earth. These new humans were different from those who had come before the flood. They were harder, tougher, more suited to the Iron Age world they would inhabit. They were literally made from stone, and they carried that hardness in their character. They would be the ancestors of the Greeks themselves, a people who would have to struggle and strive, who would build civilizations through effort and endurance, who would know both glory and suffering. Deucalion and Pyrrha also had children of their own, the natural way. Their son Helen became the ancestor of all the Greek peoples, the Hellenes who would spread across the Aegean world. From Helen's sons would come the different Greek tribes, the Dorians, Aeolians, and Ionians, each with their own character and customs, but all tracing their lineage back to this one couple who survived the flood. The flood myth served multiple purposes in Greek thought. It explained why the current age was so difficult compared to the golden age of legend. It provided a moral lesson about the importance of honoring the gods and maintaining justice. It gave the Greeks a shared origin story, a moment when humanity had to start over when the old world was washed away and a new one began. But it also fit into the larger pattern of the creation myth, the ongoing cycle of destruction and renewal. Just as Uranus had been overthrown by Cronus and Cronus by Zeus, just as the Titans had been replaced by the Olympians, so too would old humanity be replaced by new. The cosmos was always transforming, always moving forward through cycles of creation and destruction, death and rebirth. The world that emerged after the flood was the world the Greeks knew, the Iron Age of toil and struggle, but also of art and philosophy, of tragedy and triumph. It was a world where humans had fire and civilization, knowledge and crafts, but also disease and death, war and sorrow. It was a world where the gods were present but distant, intervening in human affairs, but following their own agendas, helping their favorites, but often causing more harm than good. The complete cosmos, structure and meaning, With humanity restored after the flood, the Greek cosmos was finally complete. Let's step back and look at the entire structure, the universe as the Greeks understood it, from its foundations in chaos to its complex population of gods, mortals, and everything in between. At the very bottom, deeper than anything else, was Tartarus, the primordial abyss that had emerged alongside Gaia at the beginning of creation. Tartarus was both a deity and a place, a conscious realm of imprisonment and torment. It lay as far beneath the earth as the sky stretched above it. Homer described it as being so deep that a bronze anvil falling from earth would take 9 days and nights to reach it. This was where the defeated Titans languished, bound in chains, guarded by the Hecatoncheires, locked behind Poseidon's bronze gates. It was also where the worst sinners would eventually be punished, figures like Sisyphus, who would push his boulder uphill for eternity, or Tantalus, who would stand in water that receded when he tried to drink, beneath fruit that pulled away when he reached for it. Above Tartarus was the underworld proper, the realm of Hades, where ordinary mortal souls went after death. This was not a place of punishment for most people, but neither was it paradise. It was a shadowy realm, a place of dim half-existence where the dead wandered as insubstantial shades, conscious but weak, remembering their lives but unable to truly interact with the world. Homer's Odyssey describes the dead as flocking to blood sacrifices like moths to flame, desperate for even a temporary strengthening of their faded consciousness. The underworld was divided into different regions: the asphodel meadows where ordinary souls wandered, the Elysian fields where heroes and the blessed dwelt in happiness, and the deeper regions of punishment for those who had offended the gods. Above the underworld was the earth itself, Gaia's body, the solid foundation of existence. This was where mortals lived, where cities rose and fell, where crops grew and armies marched, where the drama of human life played out under the watchful and often meddling eyes of the gods. The earth was not just physical terrain, but alive, conscious, the great mother who had birthed the first generations of gods, and who still had power that even Zeus respected. The surface of the earth was bounded by Oceanus, the great river that the Greeks believed encircled the entire world. Beyond Oceanus lay the edges of existence, mysterious lands where strange peoples lived, where the sun rose and set, where the entrance to the underworld could be found. These were liminal places, boundaries between the known and unknown, the mortal and divine. Above the earth stretched the sky, divided into layers. First came the air that mortals breathed, the realm of clouds and weather. Then came ether, the bright clear sky, the pure air of the upper atmosphere. This was where the gods moved when they descended from Olympus, the space between heaven and earth. And at the top, the solid dome of Uranus, the sky itself, studded with stars that were themselves divine beings, patterns that told stories and marked the seasons. Mount Olympus stood at the junction of earth and sky, rising so high its peak was hidden in clouds, reaching up to touch the realm of the gods. On its summit sat the palaces of the Olympians, built by Hephaestus from materials that never decayed, shining with divine light. From here, Zeus ruled, looking down on gods and mortals alike, hurling his thunderbolts when displeased, maintaining the cosmic order that had emerged from the war against the Titans. This structure, from Tartarus to Olympus, from the depths to the heights, represented the Greek understanding of reality as fundamentally hierarchical. There were levels to existence, tiers of power and consciousness. At the bottom, imprisonment and punishment. In the middle, mortal struggle and achievement. At the top, divine power and immortality. And the boundaries between these levels were permeable but dangerous. Heroes could descend to the underworld and return, but it required courage and divine assistance. Gods could walk among mortals, but their presence was overwhelming, dangerous, often destructive. Humanity occupied the middle position, caught between the divine and the chthonic, able to look up toward the gods, but always aware that death would pull them down to the underworld eventually. This precarious position shaped Greek religion and philosophy. Humans could aspire to greatness, could even achieve deeds worthy of immortal memory, but they could never truly escape their mortality. Hubris, excessive pride, trying to elevate oneself to divine status, was the most dangerous sin because it violated this fundamental structure. The creation myth, then, was not just a story about how things began. It was an explanation of why things are the way they are, why humans must toil for survival instead of living in easy abundance, why death is inevitable, why the gods are powerful but capricious, why civilization requires constant effort, why knowledge comes with costs, why fire can both warm and burn. The pattern of succession that ran through the myth, Uranus overthrown by Cronus, Cronus by Zeus, reflected Greek understanding of political reality. Power was unstable. Kings rose and fell. Dynasties replaced each other. The old order gave way to the new. This wasn't just mythological abstraction, but historical observation dressed in divine clothing. The Greeks had watched empires rise and collapse, had experienced invasions and migrations, had seen the Mycenaean palaces fall, and their own polis emerge from the ruins. The succession myth gave cosmic significance to these patterns. The role of deception in the myth was also telling. Cronus overthrew Uranus through trickery as much as force. Rhea saved Zeus through clever substitution. Zeus freed his siblings using a potion. Prometheus tricked Zeus at the sacrifice. Pandora was a beautiful trap. In every generation, cunning and intelligence proved as important as strength. This reflected the Greek value of metis, cunning intelligence, the ability to think strategically, to see through deceptions and craft your own. It was not enough to be strong like the Titans. You had to be clever like Zeus, or you would be overthrown. The creation of humanity from clay by Prometheus, and later from stones by Deucalion and Pyrrha, emphasized that humans were made from the earth, were fundamentally material beings. They were not sparked by divine breath alone, but molded from the very substance of the world. This made them different from the gods, who were born rather than made, who were immortal rather than temporary. But it also connected humans to Gaia, made them children of the earth in a literal sense, gave them a claim to the world they inhabited. The theft of fire became central to Greek identity. They saw themselves as the people who had technology, who could work metal and build cities, who had arts and sciences that other peoples lacked. Fire represented all of this, and Prometheus's sacrifice for humanity made that advancement a gift from a divine benefactor rather than something stolen without cost. The punishment of Prometheus showed that progress required sacrifice, that civilization was built on suffering, that knowledge came with responsibility. Pandora's role in the myth revealed Greek anxieties about women, about gender, about the complications of sexual reproduction and family life. Before Pandora, humanity was simple, male, uncomplicated. After her, life became complex, full of desire and frustration, reproduction and family obligations, beauty and danger intertwined. The Greeks, living in a patriarchal society, projected their fears and fascinations onto this first woman, making her both beautiful and dangerous, both necessary and problematic. But Pandora also brought hope, that one remaining thing in the jar, whether you saw it as trapped or preserved, whether as curse or blessing, represented humanity's ability to endure despite disease and death, toil and sorrow. Despite all the evils that had been released into the world, humans kept going. They built cities, raised families, created art, pursued knowledge. Hope allowed them to believe things might get better, that their efforts might be rewarded, that flood story added another dimension, showing that even after humanity was created, even after they received fire and civilization, they could still fail, could still be destroyed if they violated divine law. The salvation of Deucalion and Pyrrha showed that righteousness mattered, that individuals who honored the gods would be preserved, even when the masses perished. It was both a warning and an encouragement. Behave justly or face destruction, but know that the gods notice those who do right. Conclusion: the legacy of Greek creation. The complete Greek creation myth, from chaos to the flood, from the primordial void to the iron age of toil, gave the ancient Greeks a framework for understanding their place in the cosmos. It explained where the world came from, why it operated the way it did, what humans could expect from life and from the gods. It provided both comfort and warning, showing that the universe had structure and meaning, but also that it was dangerous, unpredictable, and often unfair. This wasn't a creation myth like some others, with a benevolent creator carefully crafting a perfect world for beloved creations. It was messy, violent, driven by conflict and betrayal. Gods overthrew their fathers. Fathers devoured their children. Trickery proved as important as strength. Gifts came with hidden curses. Progress required sacrifice. Knowledge brought suffering as well as enlightenment. Yet through all the violence and struggle, through all the cycles of destruction and renewal, something endured. The cosmos found its order. The gods established their domains. Humanity received the gifts it needed to survive and create civilization, not paradise, but possibility, not eternal bliss, but the chance to build something meaningful in the time mortals were given. The influence of this creation myth extended far beyond ancient Greece. When the Romans absorbed Greek culture, they adopted these stories, changing the names but keeping the essential narratives. Jupiter was Zeus, Neptune was Poseidon, Pluto was Hades. The myths spread throughout the Mediterranean world, influencing philosophy, literature, art, and religion for centuries. Later, Christians would reinterpret some elements of the myth. Prometheus became a Christ-like figure who suffered for humanity's benefit. Pandora became associated with Eve, the first woman whose curiosity brought evil into the world. The flood of Deucalion was seen as a Greek version of Noah's deluge. These reinterpretations showed how powerful the original myths were, how they contained themes that resonated across cultures and religions. During the Renaissance, when Europeans rediscovered classical learning, the Greek creation myth experienced a revival. Artists painted scenes of the Titans and Olympians. Poets retold the stories with new embellishments. Philosophers found in Prometheus a symbol of human striving against divine limits, of the quest for knowledge regardless of cost. The Romantic poets, particularly Percy Shelley in his play Prometheus Unbound, saw the Titan as the ultimate rebel, defying tyranny in the name of freedom. Even today, the Greek creation myth shapes our language and thinking. We call someone's downfall their Achilles' heel. Referencing Greek myth, we describe an impossible task as Sisyphean, recalling the punishment of the king who tried to cheat death. We speak of opening Pandora's box when unleashing unforeseen consequences. We describe a vast project as titanic. The myths have become part of our cultural DNA, metaphors we use even when we've forgotten their origins. The scientific names for our solar system's planets and their moons come from Greek and Roman mythology. Jupiter and Saturn, Uranus and Neptune, Titan and Prometheus, all carry these ancient names into space, literally reaching for the heavens, just as the myths once imagined the gods dwelling in the sky. The themes of the creation myth, the cycle of generations, the price of progress, the complexity of divine justice, the necessity of hope in the face of suffering, all these remain relevant. We still struggle with questions about whether technological advancement improves human life or simply creates new problems. We still wonder whether knowledge brings happiness or only reveals how much we don't know. We still hope, despite overwhelming evidence, that life is difficult and often unfair. The Greek creation myth doesn't offer easy answers or false comfort. It presents a universe that is beautiful but dangerous, ordered but violent, meaningful but harsh. It shows gods who are powerful but not always wise, generous but also petty, capable of love but also of cruelty. It shows humans as fragile but resilient, clever but prone to mistakes, capable of greatness but destined for death. In the end, that may be why the myth has endured for nearly 3,000 years. It doesn't promise that everything will be all right. It doesn't guarantee that virtue will be rewarded or that justice will prevail. It simply shows the world as it is, complex and contradictory, filled with both wonder and horror, and it suggests that meaning must be created rather than found, that humans must make their own purpose in a cosmos that doesn't care about them one way or another. The Greeks looked up at the stars and told stories about gods. They looked at the earth and saw the body of their grandmother. They felt earthquakes and imagined Poseidon striking his trident. They watched lightning and saw Zeus hurling his thunderbolts. They experienced suffering and explained it through Pandora's jar. They hoped despite everything and gave credit to that one spirit that remained trapped in the vessel, still there, still accessible, still possible. And they told these stories generation after generation, refining them, adding to them, making them richer and more complex. The creation myth wasn't a text carved in stone, but a living tradition, evolving as it was passed down, adapting to new circumstances while maintaining its essential truths. Tonight, as we reach the end of this journey from chaos to cosmos, from void to the world we inhabit, remember that you've just witnessed the birth of everything according to one people's understanding. The Greeks took the mystery of existence, the unanswerable question of why there is something rather than nothing, and they crafted a story that's both particular to their culture and somehow universal in its themes. From the primordial void emerged earth and sky, darkness and light, night and day. From conflict came order, from violence came peace, however temporary. From the overthrow of tyrants came new rulers who would themselves be threatened by their children. From clay and fire came humanity, weak but clever, mortal but capable of creating meaning in the brief time we're given. The Greek creation myth reminds us that we're part of an ancient story, that humans have always wondered about these things, have always looked at the sky and the earth and tried to understand how it all came to be. And while we now have different answers, scientific explanations for the origin of the universe and the evolution of life, we're still asking the same fundamental questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What does it all mean? The Greeks answered with a story of gods and titans, of theft and punishment, of floods and rebirth. Your answer might be different, but the questions remain eternal. If this journey through the Greek creation myth helped you find some peace tonight, helped you escape into a world of ancient stories and cosmic drama, consider subscribing to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. There's something comforting about knowing that people all over the world are hearing these same ancient stories, connected across time and space by our shared human need to understand where we came from. So close your eyes now if you haven't already. Let the story settle in your mind like sediment drifting to the bottom of a still lake. Picture chaos, the original void. Picture Gaia emerging from that emptiness, solid and real. Picture the Titans ruling during the Golden Age. Picture Zeus hurling his thunderbolt, Prometheus chained to his rock, Pandora opening her jar. Deucalion and Pyrrha throwing stones that became people. These stories have survived for thousands of years because they speak to something deep in the human experience. And now they're yours, carried in your memory, ready to be remembered and retold. Sleep well. The cosmos is vast and ancient, but tonight it's been explained, however imperfectly, through the stories the Greeks told themselves as they too lay down to sleep under the same stars we see today. From chaos came everything. From everything, stories. From stories, meaning. And that, perhaps, is the greatest creation of all.